a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess, and a criminal. Those are the 5 characters that are introduced in the beginning of one of my favorite films, The Breakfast Club, by the late, great John Hughes, who wrote and directed it. It's definitely his masterpiece. But this film's dear to my heart because it took place in high school, exactly when I was in high school. So I totally relate to it. In fact, I think most of it probably is relatable to today, particularly in American public high schools, because it's all about cliques. It's 5 kids going on, they're in detention on a Saturday morning. That's all it's about. 5 kids spending a day together, creating fate. But those cliques probably still exist, but they certainly existed where I was, which was in not Chicago, where this one takes place, but outside of Boston, Lincoln Sudbury Regional High School. And where we were, the brains were basically called that, or they're the nerds or the geeks, the ones who went on to make fortunes in the .com industry, which was just around the corner, because they were all studying computers while we were playing. Then there was the athletes were the jocks. They played football, lacrosse, hockey, all that, and they had their own clique for sure. And then the basket cases were actually just the loners. There's lots of those, unfortunately, in high school because, it breeds loners, and there's, especially if you have 1,500 kids. And the princess was what we would have called the goody two-shoes, or more the preppies, the ones who were really preppy and definitely college bound. And then there's the criminals. And we called those guys the hoods because they wore leather coats and smoked Marlboros or cigarettes in a place called the Glass Corridor. They called it the Glass. And would flick pennies at you if you dared walk through that corridor to get to your classroom. So those 5 cliques definitely existed when I went to school, so I can totally relate. But what John Hughes does so well here is he introduces these characters and creates fate for them right from the get-go. And to get us involved, to get the movie rolling, over the credits, when you're in the dark in the cinema, he starts blasting the Simple Minds classic 80s song, Don't You Forget About Me. It's an anthem of the 80s, great song. So it really gets you into the flow. And towards the end of the song, and when the credits are over, up comes this quote from David Bowie from the song Changes in white letters, which says, "And these children that you spit on as they try to change their worlds are immune to your consultations. They're quite aware of what they're going through. Changes." Turn and face the strange. I love that. Turn and face the strange. And then it has 4 ch-ch-ch-ch. Such a great song. And, that's what this whole film is about, is changes, right? Because they're teenagers and they don't want to listen to the adults. The adults are the enemy, right? So don't mess with their world. Don't tell them how to grow up, as David Bowie says in the next stanza in that song, Changes. And then as you read the last line of the Bowie quote, we realize it's on a piece of glass because it shatters and disappears, and the music stops, and we see this huge classic 1980s American high school. And Anthony Michael Hall, who is the brain in the movie, I think, starts a voiceover. So we don't see him, we just hear his voice as he says the date, which is like March 24th, 1984, Shermer High School, Shermer, Illinois, setting the stage. And then he goes on to basically read a letter that he is writing to the principal, saying how unfair it is that these students, have to be there for detention on a Saturday and have to write a letter to the principal describing who they are. It's none of your business is what he's basically writing. And as he's reading this diatribe, this rant, this letter to the principal, we're seeing different visuals that John Hughes puts in there. And it's really cool. It starts off, I think, with a clock, one of the classic clocks that you see in high schools. In fact, I think I have one. I got one at a yard sale because it's so classic, the big arms on them. And you spend a lot of time looking at them when you're in high school, right? And then you also see, I think, a cafeteria with the classic, where you put your trays on those long bars, so you slide along, and there's the Coca-Cola machine, the hot cocoa, and everything else. So they show the cafeteria, then they show some lockers, classic high school lockers, the long, narrow ones. I had one. I think I was number 244, but they all have padlocks on them. I think they show the gym. They show some graffiti on a wall. One of them says, like, I don't like Mondays, I think it says, quote unquote, or scratched into the wall, which of course is a classic Boomtown Rats song, Bob Geldof, who actually at the same time brought us the Live Aid, or no, Band Aid rather, the famous song, Christmas song, Do They Know It's Christmas, to help Africa. And of course, that spawned We Are the World later on with the American version. We see a computer room, like a really classic, 1980s big honking computers, where again, the brains, the geeks would be hanging out. We see another quote like etched into some wood on the wall. It says, "I'm eating my brain," which is like one of those classic lines from the 80s. It's basically, brain fog, anxiety, student angst, and, I'm overwhelmed. That's a 80s lingo. And Anthony Michael Hall's voiceover continues and ends actually on these lockers, these high school lockers, and one of them in particular, which at the top, I think it says, "Open this locker and you die." Fag or something like that, real 80s lingo. And at the bottom of it is a noose, literally a little noose hanging there. And from there we cut. At 7 o'clock this morning, we were still brainwashed. We believed we were a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess, and a criminal. But no more. So obviously the voiceover is taking place after the day that's just about to happen. So it's a pretty cool setup. And, it launches right into this wonderful visual where we meet these 5 people: the brain, the criminal, the basket case, the princess, and the athlete. Then we go outside to meet these 5 characters from these different groups as they arrive. And it's, like I said, one of the greatest introductions to characters I've ever seen. I just love the introduction of the Breakfast Club. So the first character that we get to meet is the princess, and that would be Molly Ringwald. And she arrives in a BMW. So literally a BMW pulls up, and actually we see the logo, the Beamer logo, and then we cut inside, and of course she's in the front seat next to her dad, because she's daddy's girl, the princess, and she's very preppy, and she's complaining like, "I can't believe I have to come in here on a Saturday. Can't you do anything, Dad?" And he's like, "I wish I could, honey. I'll make it up to you. But it's not a crime to ditch school to go shopping." And she's like, "Ah." And so she gets out and angrily, and he's sheepishly drives off in his fancy BMW. And then behind them, another car pulls up, and we go inside of that car into the front seat again. And there's this mom driving with a huge 80s haircut, and she's scolding her son, Anthony Michael Hall, who's the brain. He's like crammed against the passenger door, because in between them is his little 7-year-old sister, in her puffy winter coat. His mom is like, "Is this the first time or the last time you're going to be doing this, mister?" And he's like, "Oh, last time, Mom." And she's like, "Are you sure?" And his little sister's like, "Yeah." And then we go to the next car behind them, and it's a Bronco, the same one that O.J. Simpson had for his famous slow speed chase. And, it's a classic jock car. And sure enough, inside of that is Emilio Estevez, who's the jock, like a wrestler. He's wearing like one of those wrestling coats, with like white leather arms and blue in the front. And his dad, who looks just like him, just an older version, a big stocky guy. And he's reprimanding his son, saying, "It's okay. I got in trouble too when I was your age, but I didn't get caught." "You got caught, sport. You don't want to lose your scholarship, do you, kid?" And he's like, "No, Dad." And, so he gets out of the car. And then the last car that pulls in is a Cadillac. But as it pulls in, a student, a guy, comes across the parking lot from like the forest on the other side, and that's Bender, the Judd Nelson character, who's the criminal. And he's wearing like this long overcoat, and he just ignores the Cadillac. So he walks right in front of it, and he knows it'll stop. Of course it'll stop, and it does. It like jerks to a stop so it doesn't hit him. But because he's a criminal, he just doesn't care, So, but it says a lot about him too, right? So he just marches along, and the Cadillac stops, and out gets Ali Sheedy, the basket case. And she goes over to the door, because she's in the back seat. This is important. So she gets out of the back of the Cadillac, and she goes walking up to like say goodbye or whatever to her mom or dad, who we can't see because it's dark windows in the front, and it just drives off. Okay? So we learned a whole lot about these 5 characters right here. So even though we don't get to know their backgrounds, we learn a lot about their backgrounds just by that introductory sequence, because we get to meet basically their parents or not meet them. And it's important in each case, right? And also the cars they drive, which says a lot about their home life, which again, we don't get to witness because we're just going to see him inside the high school. So the first one's a BMW with the dad driving, and he's, all over his princess daughter. The second one is the brain who rides in this mass-produced K car, the most generic car of all time, with a scolding mom with a big 80s haircut. The third one is the jock car, the Bronco, arriving with the dad driving, of course, giving his son a hard time because he got caught. And the last one is a Cadillac. So, of course, the basket case comes from money, but her parents don't care about her. You don't even see them. She's sitting in the back, and when she gets out to wave goodbye, they just drives off, right? Because she's the basket case. And then, of course, there's the criminal who doesn't have parents at all, or doesn't arrive with parents. He just comes out of the forest or the woods and cuts off the Cadillac and marches into the high school. And, all of these characters, it's called an ensemble cast. They all arrive together, and we're going to learn all about them, but they're all very different. So they're thrust in together, creating fate where conflict, of course, is going to ensue. So this film also is cool because it had most of the members of the Brat Pack, as they called them back then, this group of incredibly successful young actors in the mid-'80s who just hit it big and ruled Hollywood for a couple of years. It was like Rob Lowe and Demi Moore, who married Bruce Willis. And then the 5 of them in this movie, which is Ali Sheedy, Molly Ringwald, Emilio Estevez, Ted Nelson, and Anthony Michael Hall. It's a real powerhouse group of young actors. And they call them the Brat Pack, which is a take on the Rat Pack, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Dean Martin. In fact, I think most of them went on to be in this other movie, which I won't talk about, called St. Elmo's Fire. Don't go there. But this movie, go there. This movie's great. So definitely give me the hitchhiker sign down below if you like this, and I'll continue doing these rambles in the future. So yes, this is an excellent example of introduction of characters and definitely of creating fate. How you get 5 really different people forced together who don't want to be together, where conflict definitely will ensue. So it's a wonderful film, The Breakfast Club from 1985. Check it out if you have time. It's well worth the ride. If you agree, disagree, whatever, just put your comments down in the comments. I'll definitely respond. And certainly if you have any films you'd like me to look at, put them there as well, and I'll try to get to them.